The year is 991 AD. The crisp autumn air carries the scent of salt and fear along the muddy banks of the Blackwater River. A small Anglo-Saxon force stands ready, their shields locked, their hearts pounding. Across the narrow causeway, a horde of Viking warriors glares back, their axes gleaming in the pale sunlight. This is not just a battle for land or gold. It's a clash of cultures, a test of wills, and a moment that will echo through history. The Battle of Maldon is more than just a fight. It's a story of defiance, of a leader who chose honor over survival, and of men who stood firm in the face of certain death. It's a tale immortalized in an ancient poem, a snapshot of a world where loyalty was worth more than life itself. But what happened on that fateful day? Why did this battle become a symbol of Anglo-Saxon resistance? And what can it teach us about courage, sacrifice, and the cost of pride? Today, on the Time-Traveling Tourist, we're stepping back into the mists of history to uncover the truth behind one of the most legendary clashes of the Viking Age. This is the story of the Battle of Maldon, a battle that changed the course of English history and left a legacy that still resonates today. So, buckle up, because this will be a journey you won't forget. To understand the Battle of Maldon, we must step back and look at the world of 10th century England. This was the Anglo-Saxon era, a time when England was divided into several kingdoms, each ruled by its leaders. The Anglo-Saxons were a people of fierce warriors, skilled craftsmen, and deep traditions. They valued loyalty, honor, and community, and their society was built on a complex web of alliances and rivalries. But this was also a time of great danger. From the north and east came the Vikings, seafaring raiders from Scandinavia who struck fear into the hearts of everyone along the coast. These weren't just random bandits. The Vikings were highly organized, ruthless, and driven by a thirst for wealth and land. They came in their iconic long ships, swift and deadly, raiding monasteries, towns, and villages. By the late 10th century, these raids had escalated into full-scale invasions, and the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were struggling to hold their ground. The Vikings weren't just after treasure. They wanted control, and as their attacks grew bolder, the Anglo-Saxons faced a choice: submit and pay tribute, or stand and fight. This tension sets the stage for the Battle of Maldon, a moment when one leader chose to make a stand, no matter the cost. By the late 10th century, England was a land under siege. The Viking raids, which had once been sporadic and opportunistic, had grown into a full-blown crisis. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, weakened by infighting and political fragmentation, struggled to defend their shores. The Vikings, sensing an opportunity, began to shift from hit-and-run raids to large-scale invasions, aiming to conquer and colonize. In 991 AD, a formidable Viking fleet descended on the coast of Essex, near Maldon. This wasn't just another raid, it was a calculated move. The Vikings chose their target carefully. Maldon was a prosperous trading town, strategically located on the Blackwater River. Its wealth made it a tempting prize, and its geography made it vulnerable. The Vikings landed on Northey Island, a small tidal island connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway. At high tide, the causeway was submerged, cutting off the island from the shore. This gave the Vikings a natural fortress, but it also created a bottleneck, a perfect place for a battle. On the mainland, the Anglo-Saxon ealdorman Byrhtnoth gathered his forces. Byrhtnoth was a seasoned leader, a man of courage and conviction. He knew the odds were against him. The Viking force was larger and better equipped, but he also knew what was at stake. If Maldon fell, it would send a message to the rest of England. The Vikings could not be stopped. Byrhtnoth made a fateful decision. Instead of paying the Vikings to leave, a common practice known as dangeld, he chose to fight. He assembled his men, a mix of professional soldiers and local farmers, and marched to meet the invaders. What followed was a battle that would become legendary, not just for its brutality, but for the ideals it represented: courage, loyalty, and the willingness to stand against overwhelming odds. This is the story of the Battle of Maldon, a clash that defined an era and left a lasting mark on English history. But to truly understand what happened that day, we need to dive deeper into the events, the people, and the choices that shaped this pivotal moment. To understand the Battle of Maldon, we must step into the world of 10th century England, a land of shifting power, deep traditions, and constant threats. This was the Anglo-Saxon era, a time when England was not yet a unified nation, but a patchwork of kingdoms, each with its ruler, laws, and identity. The most powerful of these kingdoms was Wessex, which had emerged as a dominant force under leaders like Alfred the Great. By the 10th century, Alfred's descendants had expanded their influence, creating the foundations of a unified England. However, this process was far from complete. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were still deeply divided, with rivalries and power struggles weakening their ability to respond to external threats. Socially, Anglo-Saxon England was a hierarchical society. At the top were the kings and ealdorman, noble leaders like Byrhtnoth, who governed regions and commanded armies. Below them were the thegns, a class of warrior aristocrats who served as the backbone of the military. Ordinary freemen, farmers, and craftsmen made up the majority of the population, but they were often caught in the crossfire of wars and raids. Religion also played a central role in Anglo-Saxon life. Christianity had taken root, and monasteries were centers of learning, culture, and wealth. However, this made them prime targets for Viking raiders, who saw them as easy sources of plunder. The tension between Christian values and the brutal realities of Viking raids created a sense of moral and existential crisis. Politically, the 10th century was a time of both progress and vulnerability. The Anglo-Saxon kings had made strides in unifying the country, but their efforts were constantly undermined by Viking invasions. The Vikings weren't just raiders. They were settlers, traders, and conquerors. By the late 10th century, they had established a presence in parts of England, particularly in the north and east, known as the Danelaw. This was the world in which the Battle of Maldon took place, a world of fragile alliances, cultural clashes, and existential threats. The Anglo-Saxons were fighting not just for their land, but for their way of life. And as we'll see, the choices made at Maldon would have far-reaching consequences for the future of England. The Viking raids on Anglo-Saxon England were not just random acts of violence. They were a calculated campaign of terror, disruption, and conquest. Beginning in the late 8th century, these raids would shape the course of English history for over 200 years, leaving a legacy of fear, resilience, and transformation. The Vikings first struck in 793 A.D. with the infamous raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne. This attack sent shockwaves through Christian Europe. The monks, who had no way to defend themselves, were slaughtered, enslaved, or ransomed. The monastery's treasures, gold, silver, and sacred relics, were plundered. For the Anglo-Saxons, this was more than just a theft. It was a desecration of their faith and way of life. Over the next century, the raids grew in frequency and intensity. The Vikings, masters of shipbuilding and navigation, could strike anywhere along the coast or upriver, often catching their victims completely by surprise. They targeted monasteries, towns, and villages, taking anything of value: food, livestock, weapons, and most tragically, people. Slavery was a lucrative trade for the Vikings, and many Anglo-Saxons were captured and sold in distant markets. By the mid-9th century, the raids had evolved into full-scale invasions. The Vikings began to overwinter in England, establishing fortified camps and launching campaigns deeper into the countryside. In 865 AID, the Great Heathen Army, a massive force of Viking warriors, landed in East Anglia. Over the next decade, they conquered much of northern and eastern England, including the kingdoms of Northumbria, East Anglia, and Mercia. The impact of these raids and invasions was devastating. Entire regions were depopulated, their economies shattered. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, already divided by rivalries, struggled to mount a coordinated defense. Many communities were forced to pay Dangeld, a tribute of silver or gold, to buy off the Vikings, but this only encouraged further attacks. Yet, amidst the chaos, the Anglo-Saxons also found ways to resist and adapt. Leaders like Alfred the Great of Wessex implemented military reforms, building a network of fortified towns, burhs, and a standing army, the Fyrd, to counter the Viking threat. Alfred's victories in the late 9th century marked a turning point, halting the Viking advance and laying the groundwork for the eventual unification of England. By the time of the Battle of Maldon in 991 AD, the Viking raids had become a defining feature of Anglo-Saxon life. They were no longer just a threat from the sea. They were a constant presence, shaping politics, culture, and society. The Anglo-Saxons had learned to live with the fear of attack, but they had also learned to fight back. The Battle of Maldon was a testament to that spirit of resistance, a moment when one leader and his men chose to stand against the tide of history. Every great battle is shaped by the people who fight it, and the Battle of Maldon is no exception. On one side stood Byrhtnoth, the Anglo-Saxon ealdorman of Essex, a man of courage, honor, and unyielding resolve. On the other side were the Viking invaders, fierce warriors driven by ambition, greed, and a thirst for conquest. Let's meet the key figures who defined this legendary clash. Byrhtnoth, the Anglo-Saxon leader. Byrhtnoth was no ordinary nobleman. As the ealdorman of Essex, he was one of the most powerful men in Anglo-Saxon England, a trusted advisor to King Ethelred the Unready, and a seasoned military leader. His name, derived from the Old English words Byrt, bright, and Noth, courage, perfectly captured his character. He was a man who valued loyalty, duty, and honor above all else. Byrhtnoth was also a devout Christian, a defender of his people, and a patron of the Church. He had spent years defending the coasts of England from Viking raids, earning a reputation as a fearless and capable commander. But the Battle of Maldon would test him like never before. Facing a larger and better equipped Viking force, Byrhtnoth made a fateful decision. He would not pay tribute to the invaders. Instead, he would fight, even if it meant certain death. His choice would immortalize him as a symbol of Anglo-Saxon resistance. The Viking invaders, the Vikings who landed at Maldon, were part of a larger wave of Scandinavian raiders who had been terrorizing England for centuries. These were not mindless barbarians. They were skilled warriors, shrewd negotiators, and master strategists. Their leader at Maldon is not named in historical records, but he was likely a seasoned chieftain, experienced in both battle and diplomacy. The Vikings were motivated by more than just plunder. By the late 10th century, many sought to establish permanent settlements in England, carving out territories they could control. They were also masters of psychological warfare, using fear and intimidation to weaken their enemies before a fight. At Maldon, they employed a classic Viking tactic, demanding tribute in exchange for peace. When Byrhtnoth refused, they were ready to fight and confident in their ability to win. A clash of ideals. The Battle of Maldon was more than just a physical confrontation. It was a clash of ideals. On one side was Byrhtnoth, representing the Anglo-Saxon values of loyalty, honor, and sacrifice. On the other were the Vikings, embodying the ruthless pragmatism of the age. Their encounter would not only decide the fate of Maldon, but also leave a lasting mark on the history of England. As we delve deeper into the battle, keep these figures in mind. They are the heart of this story, the men who shaped its outcome and whose legacy still resonates today. The stage for the Battle of Maldon was set on the banks of the Blackwater River in Essex, near the small tidal island of Northey. This location, with its unique geography, would play a crucial role in the events that unfolded. Let's break it down step by step. The Viking landing at Northey Island. In the summer of 991 AD, a large Viking fleet appeared off the coast of Essex. They sailed up the Blackwater River, their long ships cutting through the water with ominous precision. Their destination was Northey Island, a small piece of land connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway. At high tide, the causeway was submerged, turning the island into a natural fortress. The Vikings chose this location carefully. Northey Island provided them with a secure base from which to launch their operations. They could easily defend the causeway, and the surrounding marshes made it difficult for the Anglo-Saxons to approach unnoticed. From here, they could strike at the nearby town of Maldon, a prosperous trading center and a tempting target for plunder. The demand for tribute. Once established on Northey Island, the Vikings sent a messenger to the Anglo-Saxons. Their demand was simple: pay us tribute, and we will leave in peace. This was a classic Viking tactic. By demanding tribute, often in the form of silver, gold, or supplies, they could achieve their goals without risking a costly battle. For many Anglo-Saxon leaders, paying the Danegeld, as it was called, was a pragmatic choice, a way to buy time and avoid bloodshed. But Byrhtnoth was not like other leaders. Byrhtnoth's decision to refuse. When the Viking messenger delivered the demand for tribute, Byrhtnoth faced a critical choice. He could pay the Vikings and spare his people, at least for the moment, or he could refuse and prepare for battle. For Byrhtnoth, the decision was about more than just money or strategy. It was about honor. In his mind, paying tribute would be a sign of weakness, a betrayal of the values he held dear. He believed that standing up to the Vikings, even against overwhelming odds, was the only way to protect his people's dignity and send a message to future invaders. With resolve in his heart, Byrhtnoth refused the Viking demand. He would not buy peace with gold. He would fight for it with steel. Preparing for battle, Byrhtnoth quickly assembled his forces. His army was a mix of professional soldiers, thanes, and local farmers, men who had little experience in battle but were willing to defend their homes. They gathered on the mainland, opposite Northey Island, and prepared to face the Vikings. Byrhtnoth knew the odds were against him, but he also knew that the geography of the battlefield could work to his advantage. The geography of the battle site, the causeway connecting Northey Island to the mainland, was the key to the battle. At low tide, It was a narrow strip of land, barely wide enough for a few men to cross at a time. This created a natural bottleneck, forcing the Vikings to attack in small groups and giving the Anglo-Saxons a chance to hold them off. Byrhtnoth positioned his men at the mainland end of the causeway, forming a shield wall, a tightly packed formation of warriors with overlapping shields. This was a classic Anglo-Saxon tactic, designed to maximize defense and create a solid line of resistance. The Vikings, on the other hand, would have to cross the causeway under heavy fire, making them vulnerable to arrows, spears, and the defenders' superior position. But the geography also had its risks. If the Vikings could break through the shield wall, they would have the advantage of open ground, where their superior numbers and mobility could overwhelm the Anglo-Saxons. Byrhtnoth's decision to fight here was a gamble, one that would define the battle and his legacy. The Battle of Maldon was not just a clash of swords and shields. It was a story of heroism, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between a leader and his men. Let's step onto the battlefield and relive the events as they unfolded, moment by moment. The opening moves. As the tide receded, the narrow causeway connecting Northey Island to the mainland became passable. The Vikings, eager to engage, sent a messenger to Byrhtnoth. According to the poem, the messenger delivered a chilling ultimatum: "Send us gold, and we will grant you peace. Otherwise, we will take it by force." Byrhtnoth's response was defiant. He shouted back, "We will pay you in spears and swords, not in gold." With these words, the battle was set in motion. The Anglo-Saxons formed a shield wall at the mainland end of the causeway, their shields locked together, their spears bristling like the spines of a mighty beast. The Vikings, meanwhile, prepared to cross the causeway, their axes and swords gleaming in the pale sunlight. Byrhtnoth's fatal decision. The causeway was a natural choke point, and for a time, the Anglo-Saxons held the advantage. The Vikings, forced to attack in small groups, struggled to break through the shield wall. But then, Byrhtnoth made a decision that would change the course of the battle. In a moment of overmod, a term often translated as overconfidence or excessive pride, Byrhtnoth allowed the Vikings to cross the causeway and form up on the mainland. Some scholars argue this was an act of chivalry, giving the Vikings a fair fight. Others see it as a tactical error, born of Byrhtnoth's belief in his invincibility. Whatever the reason, it proved to be a fatal mistake. With the Vikings now on equal footing, the battle intensified. The Anglo-Saxons fought valiantly, but the sheer numbers and ferocity of the Viking force began to take their toll. The fall of Byrhtnoth. The poem describes Byrhtnoth as a towering figure, fighting with the strength and courage of a true leader. He rallied his men, urging them to stand firm and fight for their honor. But as the battle raged, a Viking warrior struck a devastating blow. Byrhtnoth fell, mortally wounded. Even in his final moments, Byrhtnoth remained defiant. The poem records his last words as a prayer of thanks to God for the joys of life and a plea for the safety of his soul. His death was a turning point, but it did not break the spirit of his men. The bravery of the Anglo-Saxon warriors. What happened next is perhaps the most remarkable part of the story. Despite the loss of their leader, the Anglo-Saxon warriors refused to flee. They fought on, inspired by Byrhtnoth's example and their sense of duty. The poem highlights the bravery of individual warriors, such as Ælfwine, who declared, "I will not flee a single step, but will fight beside my lord." Another warrior, Leofsunu, vowed, "I will not leave this field, but will avenge my lord, or die trying." These men, though outnumbered and outmatched, chose to stand their ground, knowing it would likely cost them their lives. The final stand. As the battle reached its climax, the Anglo-Saxon shield wall began to crumble. One by one, the warriors fell, their bodies littering the field. Yet even in defeat, they achieved a kind of victory. Their loyalty, courage, and sacrifice became the stuff of legend, immortalized in the poem that bears their story. The Vikings, though victorious, paid a heavy price. The Anglo-Saxons had fought with such ferocity that the invaders were left weakened and wary. The Battle of Maldon may have been a tactical defeat for the Anglo-Saxons, but it was a moral triumph, a testament to the power of honor, loyalty, and the human spirit. The Battle of Maldon ended in a decisive victory for the Vikings, but its impact reverberated far beyond the muddy banks of the Blackwater River. Let's explore the aftermath of the battle, its influence on Anglo-Saxon England, and the timeless themes it embodies. The outcome of the battle, Byrhtnoth's death, and the collapse of the Anglo-Saxon shield wall marked the end of organized resistance. The Vikings, though bloodied and weary, emerged victorious. They plundered the town of Maldon and the surrounding area, taking whatever wealth and supplies they could find. For the Anglo-Saxons, the defeat was a devastating blow, not just militarily, but morally. The loss of Byrhtnoth, a respected and experienced leader, left a void in the defense of Essex and weakened the resolve of other Anglo-Saxon leaders. The battle also demonstrated the Vikings' ability to overcome even the most determined resistance, further emboldening them to continue their raids and invasions. Impact on Anglo-Saxon England. The Battle of Maldon was a turning point in the Viking Age. It highlighted the vulnerability of Anglo-Saxon England and exposed the limitations of its fragmented defenses. In the years that followed, Viking raids intensified, and the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. They could not defeat the Vikings through force alone. This realization led to a shift in strategy. Instead of resisting every incursion, many Anglo-Saxon leaders began to pay tribute to the Vikings in exchange for peace. This practice, known as Danegeld, became increasingly common in the late 10th and early 11th centuries. While it provided temporary relief, it also drained the kingdom's resources and encouraged further Viking aggression. The Battle of Maldon also had a profound psychological impact. It became a symbol of both the cost of defiance and the enduring spirit of the Anglo-Saxon people. The bravery and loyalty displayed by Byrhtnoth and his men were celebrated in the poem The Battle of Maldon, ensuring that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. Influence on later events. The defeat at Maldon set the stage for one of the most tumultuous periods in English history. The Viking raids continued, culminating in the reign of Sweyn Forkbeard and his son Knut, who would eventually conquer England and establish a Danish dynasty. The practice of paying Danegeld, which began in earnest after Maldon, became a defining feature of King Ethelred the Unready's reign. While it bought temporary peace, it also undermined the kingdom's finances and morale. The reliance on tribute, rather than military resistance, ultimately weakened Anglo-Saxon England, paving the way for the Norman conquest in 1066. Themes of heroism, loyalty, and sacrifice at its heart. The Battle of Maldon is not just a historical account. It is a meditation on the values that define a society. The poem celebrates the heroism of Byrhtnoth and his men, who chose to fight and die rather than submit to tyranny. It emphasizes the importance of loyalty, not just to a leader, but to a shared ideal of honor and duty. The warriors' willingness to sacrifice themselves for their lord and their people is a central theme of the poem. Lines like, "Mind must be the firmer, heart the braver, courage the greater," as our strength grows less, capture the essence of this ethos. Even in the face of certain death, the Anglo-Saxon warriors remained steadfast, their actions serving as a testament to the power of the human spirit. These themes resonate across the centuries, reminding us of the enduring importance of courage, integrity, and solidarity. The Battle of Maldon may have been a military defeat, but it was a moral victory, a story of ordinary men who chose to stand for something greater than themselves. And so, the Battle of Maldon stands as a powerful reminder of the complexities of history. It was a clash of cultures, a test of wills, and a moment that shaped the destiny of England. But the story doesn't end here. The Battle of Maldon was just one chapter in the rich tapestry of English history. Its aftermath set the stage for centuries of conflict, transformation, and resilience. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think of Byrhtnoth's decision to allow the Vikings to cross the causeway? Was it an act of courage or a fatal mistake? And what lessons do you think we can learn from the bravery of the Anglo-Saxon warriors? Share your thoughts and questions in the comments below. I'd love to continue the conversation. And if you enjoyed this journey into the past, don't miss the next episode of The Time-Traveling Tourist. We'll be exploring another iconic moment in history, the founding of Westminster Abbey. From its humble beginnings to its role as the coronation church of England, Westminster Abbey has witnessed centuries of history, intrigue, and tradition. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep traveling through time with me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.